Hey, welcome everyone. You're at the ComicBase live stream. I'm your host, Pete Bickford, and welcome to another slightly delayed but otherwise perfect launch to another perfect show. Uh, we we were trying something very new today. We're going to actually be trying our very first guest spot ever with an old colleague and friend of mine, John Jackson Miller. You guys probably know him from, well, man, so many places you could know him from. He's been the head of comics retailer, Magic Era Comics Buyer's Guide. That's back in the days when we worked together on those projects. He helped found the standard catalog of comic books, and then the Siren Song of Creativity, which is as if doing all that wasn't creative enough, lured him away from his true calling, compiling statistics, and he went off and did, I don't know, a couple dozen books, comic series, probably won a shelf full of awards, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, we'll be bringing him on in just a couple minutes. I want to say thank you to the mods backstage here, and we're all trying a brand new audio setup here, and we're riding with us as best as we can. So be gentle with us if we screw anything up. It's pretty much keeping up the brand. I want to make sure that we preserve the low production values you're all used to. Anyway, little bit of brief business ahead of time. We just posted ComicBase 22.0.2, that monumental release. You can tell that is our second quarter roll-up of everything that we've been doing. Has a number of big new features, especially speeds you up if you've been working with larger titles, faster program launches, and also a lot of new stuff around the ability to tailor how you work with updates. We've been adding just a ridiculous number of content updates in recent weeks, and last week's was one for the ages. Over 600,000 new items were added, primarily magazines and newspaper type issues. 400,000 price and content changes, and this is in a single week. This is like as much content as we pushed in like the first 20 years of the program. But we just did that last week, and as some of this can actually get a little overwhelming at times. So we actually, in the new version 22.0.2, which by the way you'll be forced to download in order to get the new content update if you haven't already, it actually gives you some new update options. So when you go to pull down your update, you can actually say, hey, look, I don't actually need new data for books, comics, magazines. Pick one or all. And matter of fact, if it turns out certain of those categories are just just not something you're interested in tracking, like say you really don't care about tracking magazines, you can actually say I don't want to get updates for magazines. And matter of fact, it'll prompt you then to say whether or not you want to clear out any of the magazines that don't have any stock associated with them. And you can save yourself some space on the database file if that's more to your liking. So anyway, it's a big one. Please check it out and download it today. You can get that under the internet menu under check for updates as long as you have a current update subscription. And then last little bit of business is our spring sale is still going on. The new barcode scanners we're about 40% sold out of. These are the ones that we waited for like 6 months to have come in. So those have been flying off the shelves as fast as we could ship them. If they're not particularly on sale during our spring sale. That's because we decided with the spring sale, we're going to save you a bunch of money on software and updates. So if you're in the market for those, definitely check that out. But on the barcode scanners, you're not saving money so much if you grab them in the next during the sale period. But especially if you're looking for the wireless one, I would say sooner rather than later might be your friend, because we're not running low yet, but I'll put it this way: I did reach out to our supplier over in China and say, hey, how fast before we get more in? So anyway, if that's something that you want to get on, I'd say get on it. All right, with no further ado, let's bring in our guest. This is John Jackson Miller, and let's get down to things. Let's see, John, welcome to the stream. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine.
Holy cow, I can actually see you. And I'm also hoping, by the way, we ran several tests before the show, folks, and if it turns out that it looks like we're in a badly dubbed Godzilla movie because the lips don't match at all, apparently that's just part of the charms of StreamYard, so roll with it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I am getting some echo here. I pushed the echo cancellation, but it's not. It's feeding back on me.
Bummer. Try turning your mic down slightly. I know we were probably jacking the volumes on that when we were trying to get rolling.
I'm trying there.
You sound good here for what it's worth. Okay. Anyway, so anyway, John, I see you've got all everyone's got the cool comic setup behind them except me. But anyway, so I refer to you basically as the numbers guy. The reason I wanted to bring you on the show, because I mean, we could talk about Knights of the Old Republic, we could talk about a million things you've been working on, but in particular, I always thought, look, in this internet age of ours, like the dumbest thing we could ever be doing is having arguments about things that you could just look up, right? I mean, it was always a really fun thing to do back in the 80s, arguing about, who had the, most no-hitters in the, the American League in 1983 or something. Yeah, but as certain as you could actually just look the damn thing up, it became a stupid argument. So over time, there's been any number of comic-related arguments, about, are things doing well? Are they doing badly? Is this selling? Is that not selling? And I figured, why don't I just reach out to the one guy who actually knows more about how things sell than any other man I've ever met?
I do that.
So, all right. So, John, first of all, just a little background for the folks. If one had it in mind that one wanted to figure out how many issues of a comic book sold in, I don't know, September 1961, how does one go about doing that?
I just got to
that was the phone that I left open just in case I wasn't able to reach you before the show, which I normally have shut down, and it's shutting down right now.
Hey, lower my volume. People still getting an echo on me?
It's glitchy, but it's not echoey. So I'd say let's push forward.
People that say it's echoey. I normally don't do it.
Yeah, it's a little bit like a bad telephone, overseas telephone call. I'd say is the way I'd characterize it.
Okay, I've turned it down. Is this down? Is this better?
Let's just ride with it.
Let's ride with it. Okay. All right. So I'm glad to be here. Glad to see audience. I did as manager. She had all the DC comics. 26 years ago. It's been a long time. Let's see. Mr. Naughty, speakers are off. What is going on here?
No, you suddenly got better. It's kind of where it kind of swims in and out.
It's worse, and I hear it too. Let's see if there's something I can hear. I think StreamYard picking up what's on audio, and it's not my camera. Let's see.
Is that any better?
Do you hear me now?
Yes, I do actually. Now you sound great.
Everybody else. I'm still hearing me.
Well, yeah. Your audio.
I don't have any external speakers.
Anyway, for what's worth, the audio that I'm hearing in my headphones just got crystal clear.
Okay. It's everybody else. Everybody else is having an issue here. Like I can't hear. Let me see. Nope. Nope. I mean, if I unplug this, it's not gonna. Let's see.
This is fascinating audio, folks. I'm just gonna vamp for a second.
Yeah.
While we work this out.
Let me. There's. I do a podcast every day. This has never happened.
That's okay. This is the first time we've had a guest, and there it goes. I do have internal speakers, but no, they're completely muted on my end, folks. Thank you for asking.
It's coming from somewhere.
Tim's is pretty bad. Agent Camps is on Pete's end. John's still echoing for viewers. Must be in Pete's end. Yeah, no, sorry guys. It's silent on my end. But let me see if I can. I'm gonna try one more thing here. Actually, I'm not sure if I can try that. I'll do one more. When I killed your echo cancellation, it all got better for me. So anyway, guys, if you're always wondering, how not to do a stream, we're doing a live demo right now of things that can go wrong when you do your first stream in StreamYard. We're gonna cut out this part of the audio thing, overlay it with some really fantastic audio, and it should be fantastic. All right. We'll take a little vote from the audience. Are we still getting echoes on different people? Here I'm adding John back to the stream.
Can you hear me now?
I
got it again. Let's see. Let's see.
All right.
How's this?
Agent of Camp says still echoey. I can hear you.
Can anyone else hear me?
And as the live stream goes completely off the rails, still echoing on John's side.
Well, I'm asking, can anyone hear me now? Because I'm no longer hearing an echo at all.
Okay. Says John hears what we hear. Ed Billat says still echoing on John's side.
Okay, you can hear me now.
Oh, wait. Agent DeCamp just said perfect.
Gregory can hear me. Can anybody else hear me?
And we got a yes. We got no echo now.
Okay, good. Good. That's it. Yeah, I'm hearing nothing.
All right, so John, what did you just do? What did you do, man?
I went out, came back in again, and I switched to studio audio, and that's apparently what it is.
Okay, right. So anyway, this will be clipped out. This will be our how-to do Streamlabs video. We put off the whole ComicBase thing. You know, we're just going to do that. All right, so let's reset here.
Yeah. Anyway, so getting back to the beginning, you want to know how one would figure out what a comic book sold in September of 1961. Which
yes,
is
please.
Good time to look at it. So back in the day, there would have been a couple of ways to find that out. One would have been from the statements of ownership. Those are the postal statements that the U.S. Postal Service required to be in the backs of the comic books, the ones that were sold by subscription. Those forms have been in magazines since the 1870s, but they only started having circulation figures in 1960. And so one thing you would do is, if that title had a form for 1961, you would be able to look at that. And that would give you at least the average from the year. So that's one way that you would go. There are about 4,000 of these, 4,000 of these forms that have appeared in comics. I have almost all of them. I think I lack only like 2 or 3. Now that's
so while the rest of us were in comic books, you were collecting statements of circulation.
Yeah, that's what I've got. I've got way too many of those, and it's taken 25 years to get all of those. Another way that you would find that information is the Audit Bureau. So the Audit Bureau of Circulation would track how many copies were sold, how many copies were sold for advertisers who are looking to buy space in the comics. And so they would put out a form every year that would say what they sold and where, and in what states even. And what they would do is they would actually bundle all of the publishers' titles together, or a lot of different, or a portion of the publishers' titles together. But if you know certain facts, like when a comic book came out, and if you've got the statement of ownership data too, that even helps even more. You can sort of put together a very good guess about what a comic book sold in a given month, or for a given issue in the 1960s. And literally for every single year that we look at, every publisher, there is a different cocktail of things that you can use to figure out what the sales were. For example, if it happened to be a DC comic book from September 1961, Erwin Donenfeld at DC actually took all of those figures and put them in a notebook, which I think Paul Kupperberg at one point had access to, and every so often you'll see photos of pages from this thing appear, and this is sitting in the DC Comics archives, and they haven't been able to respond to anything that I've said asking to see those yet. But again, all of these are different ways to do it, and each one has its own alchemy to it of how, in terms of how they work. Okay, did something just happen because my echo just came back.
I just wanted to check one setting around stereo, and
whatever you checked was wrong.
right, we're gonna
good.
We're gonna stay mono but non-echo. So all right.
So we're back again. Okay.
All right.
And so depending on what the source that you're looking at is, you have to know how it worked. Now, the statements of ownership, for example, they accounted for returns. The returns were removed. It was just sales to the consumer, and that answers one of the questions in the feed there. So again, it just depends on what you're looking at. And one of the things that's kind of dangerous about all of this data is that if you don't have an understanding of the ins and outs of what they mean, there's a lot. I talk about the Audit Bureau. I've gotten a lot of data from the Audit Bureau by going to Chicago and looking at the actual microfilm that they've got of the reports from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And a lot of people have done that in the past. And Russ Maharis did some of the early work where he just got a whole lot of the numbers out there. And there's also another website that a couple of professors have done that has the numbers that are just the raw figures from the Audit Bureau's reports. But the Audit Bureau's reports are extremely complicated, and a lot of the time you think you're looking at one number for a monthly sale, and it's actually a bi-monthly total or something crazy like that. And it's because they weren't producing this information for the purposes of telling you, Mr. Comic Book fan, how many copies existed of something. This was for the purposes of an advertiser who was looking at a completely different thing. And so it took me a good year to put together sort of a roadmap to how the Audit Bureau's data worked and what it meant. And again, just any given month or year over the last 85 years, there's a different group of statistics that are available for you.
So, all right, a couple questions. First of all, so an Audit Bureau. Who's running this Audit Bureau? Is this a government entity? Is it?
No, these were businesses. They're businesses that go back to the 1800s. The Audit Bureau of Circulation, which is now part of the Alliance for Audited Media, is one of them. There was another one called BPA, Bureau of Publication Auditors, that Marvel and DC used up until about 2015. And the idea there is that they basically are a service that the publishers subscribe to, and what happens is the member advertisers have this auditing outfit as a intermediary. So a lot of the numbers that you will see in publisher statements to the Audit Bureau, well, there's two kinds. There's what the publisher says they sold, and then there's what the auditors found. Because what they will do is once a year they will go in and they will take the they would in those days take a look at exactly what the records say in the publishing company. They would go to the distributors, they would go to the printer, they would get all the actual real information, and that was what the audit said. And every so often, the audits were way off what the publisher said they sold. So, for example, Harvey in the 1970s got suspended from the Audit Bureau because they were saying that they were selling a ridiculous number of copies more than they actually were. And so again, what we've got available to us just depends on the year. We were really blessed in the 90s, 2000s, and 2010s that by virtue of Diamond having all of the exclusives for all of the all of the periodical companies, and also us having this tradition since the mid '80s of Milton Greep, first running the sales charts in the Capital City Distribution magazine that had the order index number that allowed you to calculate what they actually sold. These things were wonderful, and for a good 24 years, we had a data set from Diamond starting in '96 and going to about 2020, March of 2020, where you could look at the data in those charts as we do it in Comicron, as we've reposted over the years, our estimates. And there's 200,000 comic books that we can actually give you a real number on, and it's a reasonably close to the real thing. In all cases, they're the minimum because even the Diamond numbers didn't have the United Kingdom. The Diamond numbers, if you're looking at a monthly figure, it doesn't have any reorders that shipped outside the calendar month. But otherwise, in large measure, we had just a really, really solid data set, which, before 2003, it was just pre-orders. After 2003, it became everything. It became everything they sold. What it actually became in 2003 was what left the warehouse, what shipped from the warehouse. So that's as good as it gets.
Okay.
And so and then of course we get to the pandemic and everything goes haywire.
Okay. Agent DeCamp in the chat was asking, does your data include returns from the days where comic books were returnable?
Okay, back in the original, the statements of ownership data, returns were part of that form. So you did have to announce your returns. Now, some of the time the publishers would, so as not to make it look like they had returns, they would say, oh, well, these were copies that were office copies or copies that were destroyed for spoilage. But when there's 100,000 of them, you know what it really is. So we do actually have a figure for all of those statements from 1960 forward, where it's total copies sold, and then what I will do is I'll add any copies that would be in circulation, because they'll also say we gave out 1,000 copies per issue, or that would be unsold, but that still counts. The
Sure.
office copies, that still counts. It doesn't account for a lot, but it's there.
But for the market, those copies were available for.
Yeah.
They're around.
They're around, and the only problem that we get into with regard to returns in the 1960s and 70s is really the Mafia. It's really organized. Well, it's organized crime, which was running large swaths of magazine distribution in the 1930s and 40s. And when you get into the 1960s and 70s, you have affidavit fraud. For a long time, what you had to do when you sold a comic book, you would rip if you didn't sell a comic book, rather, if you didn't sell it, you would rip the cover off of the comic book. And you would send that cover or just the logo in for credit. And that's your returned copy. But you still had a physical copy, and this is why you have so many. Coverless comic books that are sitting around from the 60s and 70s, which you would find for sale places, because they were supposed to have destroyed those. I actually did an issue of The Simpsons I wrote. I think Bart Simpson 76 or 77. There's a story where a comic book guy has a big box of comics that are coverless because of affidavit returns. And
that was a real thing. That was the local newsstand in Minneapolis I used to go to.
And so those comics are in circulation, they're just counted as not having. They're counted as having. They're counted as having been destroyed, and so they're counted in the statement of ownership numbers as part of that destroyed or returned and destroyed portion. And then you get to what's called affidavit returns, where it becomes the honor system. And the honor system is how, as Agent DeCamp writes about Chuck Rosansky in the huge collection, he's talking about DeCamp is talking about the Mile High 2 collection, which was a group of something like 11 million comic books, which Rosansky found in a warehouse. They were Silver Age Marvel keys, and what they were is whoever was the distributor or the wholesaler rather wrote those comics off as having been destroyed. With the affidavit return, you no longer had ripped the cover off. You just swore that the comics were destroyed. And what happened in that case is that the comics weren't destroyed. What were they planning on doing with them? Almost always what they would do is whoever it was, what they would do is they would sell those comics back to the market somewhere. Usually they would sell it to a jobber that would put them in bags, 3-pack grab bags. Sure. This is distinct from the official grab bags that Marvel and DC and Gold Key did. But yeah, the whole idea is that these whenever this particular operation went south, it resulted in all these comics in perfect shape, sitting in a warehouse. According to Chuck's story, he went to Marvel about it and said, "Do you own these?" And Marvel said, "No, we don't own them because they were already written off for credit, years ago and several owners ago." And that's nobody could establish you own them, so he owned them. So, but yeah, there are always, depending on the era, a lot of nuances and yeah, but kind of things where, even if I were to tell you that there were 160,000 copies of a particular Fantastic Four that were sold and in circulation, there's probably another 10,000 or so out there. We just can never know. We'll never know. And after a certain point, you're getting into the mortality rate of the comics themselves anyway, because they start being, one of the things that I hope to do in the very beginning was, once I had my data and once we had CGC doing its, population report, which we put both of those things in the giant Pete Bickford, John Jackson Miller standard catalog of comic books. This big doorstop of a book, 1,600 pages. One of the things I had hoped for was that I wanted to do something where I could come up with sort of a mortality rate based on taking the number from the comic book's original sale and then comparing it with the number of copies that CGC had seen and in what grades. And that was something that Ernie Gerber had tried to do in the Gerber photo guides way back in the day, a mortality rate for various comics over time. And I know that Greg Holland has continued to work with this idea some. The problem that I found with it is that the CGC is not a random sample of comics. No. And so it is what is demanded by the market. And so you're going to see a mortality rate on, say, Little Dot or Little Lulu that is way, way higher just because not as many of those copies were kept, not as many of those copies were slabbed. Now, does that also reflect that people threw those comics away or they were destroyed? I don't know how we would ever know.
We gave them to our little sister, and we figured we'd never see it again, which was usually true.
Exactly. And oh yeah, we have a question here. Oh gosh, I don't want to derail the show, but I could go 5 minutes about the big diamond reprints, the fat diamond reprints. They aren't reprints, except for Star Wars. They're not.
We'll have you on another time for that one, but I gotta get you to the actual thing the whole thing.
The Whitman, Marvel, and DC editions are simultaneous printings. They are originals.
Right. Okay, so we had a we had a pre-show discussion, about just kind of general state of things, and one of the things that came up is the idea that we all have our own little periscope view of our world. It's formed a lot by what's the local comic shops near me look like, what are the areas I'm really paying attention to, and so forth. In one of the very first ComicBase live streams, our mod, I believe it was Get Reg Heck, shocked that at me because I came out of years and years of looking at diamond numbers, seeing them falling through the floor, and saying, "Man, this is not looking great." And then they point out to me, it's like, no, actually, the overall comic industry numbers, if you just define a comic, is images juxtaposed with with story integrally. I mean, has it got word balloons, that sort of thing. If you broaden out to start including things like Dogman or manga or things like that, we've never sold more. But that said, the comic industry that I knew wasn't doing all that great. I mean, it morphed in a way that it takes a little getting used to. So looking at our local comic store view of things, a lot of us, especially during the pandemic, looked around and said, like, man, this guy's barely getting by beforehand. He's not gonna reopen at the other end of this thing. And anecdotes, which it's a cousin of data, but not the same, seem to suggest that the pandemic took a hell of a hit on what we would refer to as comic stores. Do we have any numbers on, first of all, how many comic stores, things that we would refer to as their businesses primarily comic books?
Yeah, that's folly to ask that question. The number of stores, because there are, if you go by diamond accounts, you've got diamond accounts up over 3,000, close to 4,000, but a lot of them are dabblers. A lot of them get a few here, they get a few there. There might be a game store, so it might be a game store that only carries Knights at the Dinner Table or something like that. And there's general. Yeah, but I think everybody's generally felt like there's about 2,500 mainline stores that mainline meaning they'll order new diamond comics for the wall. That number is up since the pandemic, or since before the pandemic. And again, you mentioned there being a lot of different ways to study this. The largest universe that I study is with ICV2. That's Milton Greep's outfit, with our annual report. But even within that, we have drill downs where we'll look at just the direct market, or we'll look at just comic books and just comic books within the direct market. And then I drill it down a lot further on Comicron, where I go even further. Now,
by the way, it's a good time to insert a proper plug for your site.
Comicron.com, COMICHRON.com. And our annual report for 2022 is coming up. But I've already tipped, not 2022, but our 2021 report, because it takes us like 6 months to get it done. But I can tell you that the number of comic books that direct market stores sold in 2021, I have that, and I should say that it is harder to track exact numbers than it was because of the changes that happened at Diamond and DC and Marvel. But I have it, I think, relatively reliably at 94 million copies in 2021. The total in 2019, that is before the pandemic, was 83 million copies.
Okay, now when you say copies of what? Are we talking like
single issue periodicals?
Okay.
Single issue periodicals. That number dropped to 63.2 million in 2020, and that drop was largely because the publishers didn't put out the work. That drop was largely because the slates declined by over 25%. Marvel is just dark for 2 months, and that is huge. And when they come back, Marvel was very slow to come back after the Diamond shutdown, and so what I'm able to do is there's a number of ways that we have to track things now. As someone was asked about this as well. Lunar is not releasing sales figures for DC. We know, however, that DC. I've got a couple of resources that I use for that. I have a basket of retailer orders that I look at. I also look at what Milton has with his Comic Hub information, and then I also am able to do some historic tracking with make-alikes, where you generally know that these titles are clustering together, and we know further that there's basically unit sales-wise about a 3-to-2 split between Marvel and DC. So there's a number of things that you can look at that can sort of help you backstop a prediction. Diamond, of course, had Marvel. Diamond had all of Marvel for 9 months in 2021, and they had all of everything but DC for 2021. And then for the last 3 months of 2021, Diamond had 36% of Marvel. So we know that even before we get to the month of June, where IDW goes to Random House, just like Marvel did, what we have is a direct market where Diamond is accounting for about 42-43% of the comic books sold in the comic shops. Random House, Marvel, is about 30-31, and DC is about 27, whatever the balance is that gets you to whatever the balance is. And again, because we know what Diamond sold of Marvel's regular titles all through 2021, and then we saw what had happened when it went to October, November, December. Because we know what those are, we know that Diamond was able to keep 36%, 37%, something like that, about 3/8 of Marvel's business. And so, for example, when the numbers for February and March come out, which will come out tomorrow, I'm gonna ride this Marvel estimate for probably, well, I'm taking it into the first quarter of 2022. Don't know if I'm going to take it much further because I'm going to need some more inside information to be able to go further with it. But one of the things that I can do is, you're going to see on Comicron, as is already there for January 2022, you can see the exact number that Diamond shipped to North American stores of Spawn and all the Image and Boom comics. With the Marvel comics, you've got what Diamond shipped, and then I have another column which is a projection for Marvel based on what the case would be if Marvel is continuing to sell 5/8 of its comics through Random House. And so again, we're in a position we don't want to be in, where we're having to actually do some projections. But if you think about it, in the 1990s, the early 1990s, even when we had the sales figures coming out from Diamond and from Capital, well, Diamond itself was only 40% of the business then. It's kind of funny that Diamond was 40% of the business before and 40% of the business now. Not funny for them, I'm sure, but it's kind of what it is. Someone has asked, would it be possible to get the information from the printers? Not without a lawsuit. That's proprietary information, and that is how Lunar is looking at the information that they've got of DC's. Basically, I believe that there has been a public good that has been served in comics. First of all, by having these numbers available, when we had the numbers start out in the beginning, why were the numbers available? The numbers were available because Capital City wanted people who discovered that there was a new comic book from this new company called Dark Horse, or this new company called Viz or whatever it might be. They wanted them to find it in their sales charts, and they wanted people to be able to compare it with national sales of Amazing Spider-Man, or Uncanny X-Men was actually their title that they were using at the time. And they were able to go, oh, well, I ought to be carrying more copies of this particular title so that it will turn me from being part of a local market into a national market. And so for years, retailers have used these charts, particularly those retailers who are just starting out. If you're just starting out with a new comic shop, how do you know how many copies to order of anything? Well, you've been able to go to the Diamond charts over the years and see that, yeah, for every 100 copies of Batman, you probably need to order about 50 copies of Avengers or whatever the other figure happens to be. So that's a service that's been there for. That's why Diamond's had it out there for the retailers. But it's also useful for we consumers because it allows us to have some sort of defense against what happened in the early 90s when everything was supposed to be a hot collectible, everything was supposed to be limited edition, and here's X-Men #1 with 8.1 million copies in print.
Yeah, I mean, Darkhold was limited, to 1.2 million or whatever.
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, I mean, there are fields, and of course, you recall since I was at Krause Publications, we had publications for comics and coins and
Sure.
everything under the sun. We had them on, and I could tell by visiting these other editors working in these other fields that there are other fields where there is there's a ethical obligation by the people who manufacture limited edition items to say how many copies exist. And in the case of coins and paper money, there is a legal obligation to say how many copies exist of a coin or a dollar. The press run or of the money or the number of coins struck. That is legally required public information. And Diamond is still doing the numbers, even though they have a smaller portion of the market. It would sure be great to have it from everybody else. And I can tell you that there are discussions ongoing. And
All right.
We'll see what happens.
I'm going to do that thing that podcasters never do and say, I've only got about 14 minutes, so I gotta get some quick answers. I'd love to let this run long, but I think we'll just have to do it again if that works out for you. But so what I heard from you beforehand was, once upon a time, maybe we had 5,000, maybe, Diamond County, ordered comic book things. By the time the pandemic rolled around,
even more. Well, is the last time we haven't seen 5,000 since 1996.
Sure. But what you're saying is we were down to the 2000s range, pandemicville, but we actually came back stronger than we were before for people who are going to put in an order for monthly comic books. Yeah,
and actually we were down around 2000, probably at the low. There were two low points in the Diamond era. One was 2000, 2001, which was the real nadir of that's still part of the 7-year collapse that followed the color comics crash of 1993. Coming off of that, and all the distributors going away except for Diamond. So that was one of the low points. I think we're right around 70 million copies of periodicals at that point. And they were right around 70 again, or actually, let's see, the number is 73 million. That was in 2010. That was basically a recession year before we got to the new 52. And we would have been around 2,000 stores around then. We're up from there. And again, one of the things that is just sort of challenging now is, it's very hard to, define, one store. All stores are not created equal. I mean, stores are might be, only dabbling in comics, as we've mentioned, I think one of the things that I think people really overlooked. When Diamond shut down, I wrote a column which was basically a case for hope, more or less, or a case for optimism. And one of the things I had said is that one of the things that was helping comic shops is that they had diversified since the 1990s. They had Funko Pops, they had T-shirts, they had other things to sell. They had graphic novels, so they had an entire library room, or not room, but a library section in many stores with physical books, and those never stopped shipping. Random House never shut down. The other distributors of graphic novels never stopped distributing in that period. It was just Diamond over that 7-week period. And so you have that dynamic, and then you have the dynamic that if you're a store that sells back issues, well, the fact that you didn't get the this week's 60 comic books that came out, or 60 different comic books that came out, well, you already have a store which is stocked with a selection, hopefully a good selection of comics from what to be hundreds of thousands of different comic books that have come out over the years.
All right, so there used to be a guy who's like the retailer relations guy over at Diamond. He put out a book called "So You Want to Be a Comics Retailer." It was like the grimmest book you'll ever read.
Oh, I remember that. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was all these deadly numbers associated with being a comic retailer. It basically said you're going to work yourself to death, you'll make no money, and it will be, it's not for the faint-willed. Do we have a sense what the product mix is at, again, the stores we would refer to as a comic store? We're just going to define that as someone who buys monthly comics.
Yeah.
What product mix in that store, do we have a sense, is comics still? Or are they just got...
Again, it depends on the store. Back in the day, Mel Thompson, who was selling a point of sale system called Comtract.
It's the reason that we don't offer a point of sale system with ComicBase. We saw how hard it was to do that.
He had a typology for comic shops. So he had sort of the college shop, college or neighborhood shop, the suburban shop, which tends to be mostly Marvel, that sort of thing. And Brian Hibbs, who's been mentioned in the feed here for a while here, actually owned both kinds. He had 2 different stores in San Francisco. Comic Experience. He had Comic Experience, which is heavily graphic novels, and then he also had Comic Experience Outpost, which was a traditional Marvel DC kind of store.
They're both great shops.
So again, it just really depends. Now I can tell you that Diamond sells $2 of comic books for every $1 of graphic novels they sell.
Yeah, but again, is Diamond really the competitive place to buy graphic novels?
No, and I'm simply saying that if you're a store that only gets them from Diamond, that's kind of the universe that you're working in. But there are very few stores that just do that anymore. And
okay, so you're kind of freaking me out, because I usually look to you for gloom and doom when I'm feeling too good about life, and you're kind of changing it up on me here.
Well,
with this.
You haven't been talking to me since the Krause days, because when we were doing that stuff, I had just gone through 7 years of hell, because I started working there right as the market crashed, and it was me going again and again and again. Back to the well of numbers, hoping there was some hope in there somewhere.
All right,
but what happens is Marvel rights the ship in the early 2000s. We get Civil War. We have a retrenchment in the early 2010s due to the recession, and also basically the first wave of energy has played out there in the late 2000s. But then, we hit a peak, 2015, 2016. We have a definite retrenching in 2017, where we're down by about 10%, but we've recovered all that from there. So, these things, one of the things about me having done this for so long and looking back before even I was born to previous collapses is when I will see things now, like what happened in 2017, for example, I realize that that's barely a blip in terms of what we used to consider a crash, or what we used to consider. I mean, we lost, two out of three stores from 1993 to 2000. That's.
And I think your stock is now owned by Torpedo Comics out in warehouses out in the Las Vegas desert.
Yeah, and just the the scale of the losses in the late 50s, for example. Will Eisner said that comics nearly died 3 times. Every time we invent a way out of it, and so I kind of look at it much more holistically now. So comics collapsed in the 1950s, partially due to the Comics Code and censorship, but I think the bigger problem was television. I think the bigger problem was that everybody got a TV in the 50s, and comics no longer were the cheapest babysitter. And so what did we do? We came up with the Silver Age. We put we put all of our we circled the wagons around our strongest demographic, which was young males, adolescent males, and superhero comics, and everything else fell away, and we overdid it, and you have the second big near-death experience in the 70s when newsstand distributors start getting rid of comics because it's no longer worthwhile. What do? We invent our way out of it with the direct market, with comic shops, with a way to sell to consumers where there's almost no waste. We're no longer printing 3 copies to sell 1. And it revives the business again. And once again, we go too far with it a decade later. The thing that always saves us is the next thing that usually kills us, or nearly kills us. And so in the early 90s, we have this boom and bust. And the boom and bust, again, people say it's all about speculation, and that was a big part of it, but that was a symptom. What we really had in the early 90s, and Chuck Rosansky has beaten the drum on this a lot himself, is that we had a credit bubble. We had, by having 12 distributors willing to open up a comic store anywhere across the street from another one. Memphis, we had 2 situations where we had a Capital and a Diamond store across the street from each other. We had a store in a psychiatrist's office. All right.
I gotta push it on. But
what I'm saying is, and what do we do how do we invent our way out of this collapse? It's the graphic novel, it's the trade paperback. It's allowing us to monetize our past. And so again, this is I think it's good that we've got this kind of resilience in the business.
Okay, got 3 quick questions. I'm going to try to get through them in about 6 minutes. Let's see how we do. First of all, do we have a sense of how many comic readers there are? In other words, how many people are going to walk into a comic book store at least once a month and buy a comic book?
Okay, the way that I've usually gauged this, and again, nobody has that information publicly. The way that I've usually, nobody who wants to do a survey is going to share that information, or has the money for a survey. The way that I usually look at is okay, if you know that we have $600 million a year coming out of print comics and graphic novels being sold in comic shops, that's $600 million. Well, you can kind of figure that. All right, let's say that your hardcore comics reader is spending $20 a week, at least $20 a week, $1,000 a year. $1,000 a year, that gives you room for 600,000 of those people in that $600 million. And
yeah, but you're assuming equal distribution. That doesn't make it.
Now you take the 80-20 rule or whatever you want to use and kind of figure out what it is. But you now know a ceiling. The ceiling is there can't be more than 600,000 people spending $1,000 a year. There can't be. And so and usually what I would do is I'd say, well, you can chop it in half, 300,000, 200,000, 300,000. 200,000, 300,000 makes sense because that suggests you've got about 100 people per comic shop that are regulars.
Okay.
And then the long tail trails off.
I'd say
and there's people spending more and people spending less. But yeah, I mean, how else can you do it except calculus?
Well, I mean, has no one tried actually polling comic store owners and say how many people have you got with a pull list?
But again, well, yeah, and there are services that are doing that too. But again, you know what? Historically, the number of readers has been a very hazy thing because the publishers themselves would, whenever they would do any research, they would inflate numbers dramatically by what they called pass around. So,
only I for that copy of X-Men. I'm going to give it to 3 of my friends. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And so that's why most of these colossal numbers you see from the 50s and 60s and 40s, you'll say, "Oh my gosh, everybody read comics." Well, no, what they were doing is they were assuming a pass-around rate of 8 copies per single issue.
All right, I'm going to limit myself to one more question because I know that otherwise we're never getting out of here. I'll have to have you back. Let's take one comic book that's existed through all this time. Let's say Batman 100. How many copies, give or take, are we talking?
Batman 100, Batman issue 100 from back in the day. Which Batman 100 do you mean? There are 3.
Well, like Batman 100, like the one that we care about, the one from the 50s.
Okay, the one from the 50s. Well, that's gonna be back before we've got statement of ownership data, because that's gonna be before 1960.
Okay.
So
let's roll forward a couple hundred issues. Let's go to Batman 300.
Batman 300, and again, let me call up. Here we go.
By the way, for everyone out in the audience right now, John is no doubt looking at some ginormous spreadsheet he's got.
I'm actually looking at the 1966 page for Comicron.com. Batman in 1966 sold an average of 900,000 copies per issue. That was its peak. That was the only time it was ever #1 in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, or 80s among comic sales, annual comic sales. And again, that was because of the TV show. It had this big
and besides, and there was only the one Batman title, unless you count Detective.
No, Detective counts, but yeah, and Detective was 400,000.
Right, but it's not like the 8,500 Batman titles throughout this month.
That's right. But that's the other thing is, a lot of people will look at the sales and they say, "Well, gosh, these numbers are so low now. It must be terrible."
That's what I'm doing right now. So, I mean, what's the current issue of Batman, or the last issue that you updated?
Current issue of Batman's doing about 120, 130. But again, first of all, you have to add up all the Batman titles, not just the. There are many more books coming out. So you add all of those. The other thing, the phenomenon that we saw happen in the late 2000s and really ballooned in the 2010s is it used to be in the diamond charts, we would go past Marvel and DC and Image and there'd be nothing. I mean, we'd be down to Claypool, we'd be down to like 1,000 copies, 2,000 copies each. We actually developed a middle tier. IDW and Boom and Dynamite and Dark Horse, these other publishers that are in there, boosted the bottom of the charts so that it used to be you get to 300th place and we would be under 1,000 copies. Now you get to 300th place and we're over 5,000, and that adds up. And so that's one of the reasons that even though the highest heights are lower, the bottom of the chart is higher. There's been a smoothing of the curve. So you have that going on. And the other thing to always keep in mind here is the comic book, the periodical, is no longer responsible for 100% of the monetization of a project. It's a small fraction.
All right. Anyway, John, I'm afraid that's all the time we've got, but thank you so much for joining us. And we're just going to have to do this again another time. Appreciate it, everyone who asked questions and everything. If anyone wants to contact you, how do they do so?
For Comicron, comicron.com is the website. The Twitter feed is Comicron, Comichron. There is also a Facebook page for Comicron. There is also a Patreon for Comicron. That's patreon.com/Comicron. And then for me and my fiction work, farawaypress.com is my comics and fiction site. JJM Faraway is my handle for Twitter, and then John Jackson Miller on Facebook and Instagram. And the Kenobi novel is now out again in a new trade paperback. And the next novel for me is Star Trek: Strange New Worlds: The High Country, the first novel for that franchise. So
and that's going to be out.
That is going to be out at the beginning of the year. So the novel is done, but it's one of the things that's hitting everybody is kind of the paper crisis, getting paper supplies. Things are kind of way out there. So again, thanks for having me, Pete. Good seeing you again, and may the force live long and prosper.
All right, you take good care. Thanks for joining us. All right, everyone, that's going to do it for now. Thank you for everyone who soldiered with us on the technical problems for tonight. We'll get better, I swear. It's just like one of those old Ed Wood movies. If the last show was horrible, well, we'll do another one, and it'll be better. Anyway, we're trying new tech, and hopefully this will allow us to do new and cool things and bring on different guests. If you guys have ideas for guests you'd like to have us talk to, different topics you'd like this to bring up, please, there's a dedicated forum in the forum discussion on the ComicBase forums. Please feel free to suggest topics for us, and we'll hit them as many as we can. All right, guys, that's about it for me. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Take care.